$12.7 million. That's what my replacement cost the company in 11 days. My name is Gordon Wallace. I'm 52 years old, and I just watched a 28-year-old MBA and her 30-year-old fiancé destroy a system I spent 23 years building. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I was a systems architect at Quantum Tech Solutions in Austin, Texas. Not the flashy kind of tech job where you give TED Talks or post on LinkedIn about disrupting industries. I was the guy who made sure everything actually worked. For 23 years, I kept the backbone of a $200 million company running without a single major failure. While other people played office politics and networked at happy hours, I made sure millions of dollars in transactions processed correctly every single day. I lived alone, divorced about 8 years back. My daughter was in her 3rd year at Harvard Med School, which was costing me about $65,000 a year even with scholarships. The severance package would help with that, but at 52, finding another job in tech wasn't going to be easy. Everyone wants the 28-year-old who works for half the salary. Everything changed when Madison Ashford took over operations. She was Howard Ashford's daughter. Howard built Quantum Tech from nothing back in the 90s, a genuinely decent guy who just happened to have a massive blind spot when it came to his princess. Madison came in fresh from her MBA program, full of ideas about modernizing and disrupting and all those other buzzwords that sound good in a boardroom but mean nothing when you're dealing with actual systems. She wanted to get rid of the old guard. I know because someone leaked an internal email where she wrote, "We need to purge the boomer mentality and bring in fresh perspectives with real AI expertise." I was 52. I was the boomer mentality she wanted purged. The betrayal came on a Tuesday morning in March. Madison's assistant called me up to her corner office. She was sitting there in a designer suit, eyes on her laptop, barely looked up when I walked in. "Gordon, we're restructuring. Your position is being eliminated. We're going in a different direction." I kept my face blank. "Who's taking over systems architecture?" She looked up then, and I saw that little smile. "Troy Bennett, my fiancé. He's an AI and machine learning expert. We're finally bringing this company into the modern era." Troy Bennett. I'd met him at the Christmas party 3 months earlier. He was the kind of guy who threw around terms like neural networks and disruptive innovation but couldn't explain basic concepts like load balancing. I'd done my homework on him. His LinkedIn showed he'd been a junior developer at a startup that folded in 16 months. Madison had apparently inflated his resume to justify the hire. "I'll need all documentation, passwords, and backup procedures by Friday," Madison said, already looking back at her screen. "HR has your severance ready." Of course, I'll make sure everything is properly documented. What Madison didn't realize was that she'd just made the most expensive mistake in Quantum Tech's history. See, documentation is just paper. It's a skeleton without muscle or nerves. You can write down every password, every procedure, every system quirk, but you can't document 23 years of experience. You can't write down that server bank C always runs hot on Friday afternoons when the automated reports kick in. Or that the backup system has a 30-second delay quirk during peak load that needs manual intervention. You can't teach someone through a manual how to recognize the early signs of a cascade failure. But I'd give them exactly what they asked for. Over the next 3 days, I created the most comprehensive handover documentation in corporate history. I worked 14-hour days creating step-by-step guides, system architecture diagrams, troubleshooting protocols. Every password went into encrypted files with detailed explanations. Every backup procedure was outlined in excruciating detail. I mapped every dependency in our Kubernetes clusters, explained the microservices architecture, documented every quirk in our load distribution system. It was all there, perfect, complete, and absolutely useless without the experience to understand what it actually meant. On Friday afternoon, I met Troy for the official handover. He walked into the server room wearing designer jeans and a crisp button-down, completely wrong for the environment. The confidence coming off this kid was impressive. "So, Gordon," he said, barely glancing at the massive binder I'd prepared, "I've been researching AI-driven predictive maintenance. We can probably automate 90% of what you've been doing manually." I handed him the documentation. "Everything you need is here. Passwords, procedures, maintenance schedules, emergency protocols." He flipped through maybe 5 pages, eyes already glazing over at the technical details. "Looks pretty straightforward. I've worked with way more complex systems than this." His previous job had been maintaining a basic web app for an e-commerce startup. But I didn't say anything. My last day was the following Monday. I cleaned out my desk, said goodbye to a few colleagues. Diane Patterson, our lead network administrator, pulled me aside. "Gordon, are you sure about this?" she whispered. "Troy asked me yesterday what TCP/IP stands for. I'm seriously worried." I gave her a diplomatic smile. "I'm sure Madison knows what she's doing." Diane wasn't the only one worried. Clarence Wells, our 55-year-old senior DevOps engineer, had been demoted to make room for Troy's young talent. Alex Kowalski, our 48-year-old lead database administrator, was on the restructuring list. They both knew what was coming. "This is going to be a disaster," Clarence said quietly as we shook hands. "Maybe," I replied, "but I documented everything. If something goes wrong, it won't be because I didn't do my job." I drove home in my 10-year-old Honda Civic feeling strangely calm. I'd done everything right. I'd created perfect documentation, provided comprehensive training materials, followed every protocol. If disaster struck, it would be because arrogance and inexperience replaced competence and wisdom. Over the next week, I updated my resume and reached out to former colleagues. The severance was decent, about 6 months' salary, enough to cover my daughter's spring semester tuition and keep me going while I looked for work. At 52, that search wasn't going to be quick. On Wednesday evening, exactly 11 days after I'd walked out for the last time, my phone rang. It was Diane, calling from her personal cell. "Gordon, something's really wrong with the system." I set down my bourbon. "What happened?" "Troy tried to implement some kind of AI optimization on the thermal management system today. Now half our servers are running critical temps, and the backup cooling system won't engage." My stomach dropped. The thermal management system was one of the most delicate parts of our entire infrastructure. It needed precise calibration based on seasonal temperature variations, server load patterns, and the specific quirks of our HVAC setup. Troy had essentially performed open-heart surgery without knowing what a heart looked like. "What exactly did he modify?" I asked. "The thermal protocols." He said the original settings were too conservative and that his AI algorithm could reduce power consumption by 30%. "Gordon, he rewrote the core monitoring code." I closed my eyes. "You need to revert those changes immediately. There's a manual override in panel B7. The procedure is in the documentation I left. Troy won't let us touch anything. He says reverting would be admitting failure. He's still trying to fix it with his algorithm." That's when I knew this was going to be bad. Pride plus incompetence is deadly when you're dealing with systems that process millions of dollars in transactions every day. "Keep me updated," I said. "And Diane, start documenting everything he does. Every decision, every change, every time someone warns him." "Already on it," she said quietly. I hung up and poured another bourbon. The system I'd built was robust, but it wasn't designed to survive someone actively breaking it. I sat there in my living room waiting for the other shoe to drop. It took 2 more days. Friday morning at 6:47 a.m., my phone rang. Howard Ashford. "Gordon, thank God you answered." His voice was shaking. "We need you here immediately. The entire system is down. Everything. Customer data, financial records, order processing. It's a complete catastrophe." I walked to my window looking out at the quiet Austin suburb where I'd lived for 15 years. "What happened, Howard?" "I don't know the details. Troy tried to upgrade something yesterday afternoon and now our servers are overheating. Backup systems won't engage, alarms going off everywhere. We've already lost 3 major clients this morning. If we don't fix this by Monday, we're looking at bankruptcy." Yeah, I saw the irony. The man who'd let his daughter fire me was now begging for help. "I'll need remote access to run diagnostics first," I said calmly. "Then I'll decide if I can help. Anything you need, Gordon. Name your price." 2 hours later, I was staring at my laptop screen at the most comprehensive system failure I'd ever seen. Troy hadn't just modified thermal management. He'd completely rewritten core infrastructure algorithms using some half-baked AI model he'd found online. It was like watching someone perform brain surgery using YouTube tutorials. The cascading failures were actually impressive in their scope. Overheating servers triggered emergency shutdowns, which overloaded the remaining systems, which caused backup power to cycle erratically, which corrupted database checksums, which triggered security lockdowns to prevent data breaches. Everything that could go wrong was going wrong, and it was all interconnected. My phone started buzzing with texts. Madison. "Gordon, I know we had differences, but please help us. I was wrong about Troy. We need you." Troy. Mr. Wallace, I may have made some errors in judgment. Could you help us understand what went wrong? Errors in judgment, like calling the Titanic a minor navigational issue. By noon, board members were calling, department heads, even some clients who'd somehow gotten my personal number. Word was spreading through Austin's tech community that quantum tech was in free fall. Remote access wasn't going to cut it. I needed to be on site. I drove to the office that afternoon. The parking lot was chaos. News vans, panicked employees running around, and what looked like federal investigators. When systems handling financial data fail this catastrophically, the government shows up. Security recognized me and waved me through without a badge. Madison met me at the elevator. Her designer suit was wrinkled. First time I'd ever seen that. Her hands were shaking as she held out a temporary access card. Gordon, I'm so sorry. I made a terrible mistake. I thought I knew better, but I was so wrong. Behind her stood Troy. All that confidence was gone. He looked like he hadn't slept in 2 days. Mr. Wallace, he said quietly, I think I may have misunderstood the system's complexity. The AI optimization I implemented had unexpected interactions with the existing infrastructure. That's what he called 23 years of carefully crafted, battle-tested code that never failed once under my management. I didn't waste time on speeches. Where's Howard? Conference room with the board, Madison said. They're trying to figure out our legal exposure. I went straight to the server room. Diane was there with Clarence and Alex, all of them looking exhausted. The temperature in the room was at least 85 degrees. Alarms were screaming. Half the monitors showed critical errors. Thank God, Clarence said when he saw me. We've been trying to manually override the cooling system, but Troy's code locked us out of the controls. Show me. What you've tried, I said, sitting down at the main terminal. For the next 4 hours, I diagnosed the full extent of the damage. It was worse than the remote access had shown. Corrupted databases would need restoration from backups that were 3 days old, meaning 3 days of customer data was gone forever. Thermal damage required replacing at least 6 servers at $15,000 each. The security lockdown had triggered compliance violations that would bring federal audits and massive fines. But the real damage was reputational. By Monday morning, every company in Austin would know that quantum tech suffered catastrophic failure due to incompetent management. Around 8 p.m., Howard found me in the server room. He'd aged 10 years in 11 days. Gordon, I owe you an apology. I should never have let Madison make that decision. You built this company's foundation, and I let someone destroy it because I was too proud to admit my daughter wasn't ready. I looked up from the server I was rebuilding. Howard, I documented everything. I provided comprehensive training. I followed every protocol. The information was there. They chose to ignore it. What would it take to get you back? Permanently. Not just to fix this mess, but to make sure it never happens again. I'd been thinking about this since 6:47 a.m. 5-year contract as Chief Technology Officer, reporting directly to the board, not to Madison. Complete autonomy over all technical decisions, 2% equity stake in the company. And Troy gets terminated immediately. Howard didn't hesitate. Done. Madison gets reassigned to marketing where she can't touch operations. One more thing, I said. Clarence gets VP of Infrastructure. Alex runs the entire database division. Diane becomes Director of Network Operations. The people who actually know what they're doing get the positions they deserve. Agreed. That night I worked until 3 a.m., slowly bringing systems back online. It was delicate work, like diffusing a bomb one wire at a time. Every change had to be tested, every connection verified. One wrong move and we'd trigger another cascade. As I finally headed out, I passed Troy in the lobby. He was carrying a box with his desk items. Even at 3 in the morning, security had escorted him out the moment Howard made the call. He looked up at me. Mr. Wallace, I really thought I understood systems architecture. I was wrong about everything. Experience is a harsh teacher, I said, but it's the only one that matters. The next 3 weeks were brutal. I worked 18-hour days methodically rebuilding what had been destroyed. Clarence, Alex, and Diane worked alongside me, and it felt good to have competent people around again. People who understood that flashy innovations mean nothing if the foundation isn't solid. We'd grab drinks at a bar on 6th Street some evenings when we finally knocked off around 10 p.m. I saved all his emails, Alex said one night, grinning over his beer. Troy asked me how to spell PostgreSQL, not how to configure it, how to spell it. Clarence shook his head. Kid asked me what the difference between RAM and ROM was. Thought he was joking. He wasn't. Did you see his AI optimization code? Diane asked. He copied it from a GitHub repository for a college project. Didn't even understand what it did. We restored databases from the 3-day-old backups, working with clients to reconstruct the missing data where possible. We replaced the 6 damaged servers. We implemented new safeguards to prevent anyone from making system-critical changes without proper review. But more importantly, I documented everything that went wrong. Every mistake, every bad decision, every ignored warning. It became a comprehensive case study in what happens when you prioritize trends over competence. The media attention was relentless. Austin Business Journal ran a front-page story, Tech Meltdown, when inexperience meets mission-critical systems. They didn't mention me by name, but everyone in the industry knew what had happened. My phone rang constantly with former colleagues wanting to know the real story. The federal audit hit 2 weeks after the crash. The SEC sent 3 investigators who spent a month going through everything. The compliance violations from the security lockdown cost the company $3.1 million in fines. The investigation took 6 months to fully resolve. Client losses were worse than we'd initially thought. By the end of the first month, 5 major clients had terminated their contracts, including 3 of our top 10 accounts. That was $8.7 million in annual revenue, gone. Some cited the data loss, others cited loss of confidence in our stability. All of them had been spooked by seeing federal investigators in our lobby. But the real damage was reputation. In tech, word spreads fast. Conferences, LinkedIn posts, industry publications. Quantum tech solutions became the cautionary tale everyone referenced when talking about the dangers of prioritizing buzzwords over substance. Madison tried to rebuild her credibility. She attended every technical meeting for the first 2 months, asking questions, taking notes. But board members who'd once seen her as the company's future now saw her as the person who nearly bankrupted them. Howard's disappointment was obvious every time he looked at her. My new role as CTO came with a corner office on the executive floor, a salary that was nearly double my old one, and that 2% equity stake that would be worth serious money if we recovered. More importantly, I had the authority to make decisions without someone second-guessing me because they'd read a blog post about AI. I reported directly to the board. Madison was in marketing now, and our paths rarely crossed. When they did, she couldn't meet my eyes. 6 months after the crash, I got invited to speak at the Southwest Technology Conference. The topic was crisis management and system recovery. I almost said no, but Diane convinced me it was important. People need to hear this story, she said. Too many companies are making the same mistakes. The auditorium was packed. CTOs, system architects, senior developers. I talked about institutional knowledge, about the difference between documentation and experience, about the hidden costs of dismissing expertise in favor of youth and buzzwords. During the Q&A session, a young developer in the front row raised his hand. But isn't comprehensive documentation supposed to be enough? Shouldn't good systems be maintainable by anyone with the right documentation? I thought about Troy, who'd had access to perfect documentation but lacked the judgment to use it properly. Documentation is essential, I said. It's the foundation. But it's not a substitute for experience. A manual can tell you what button to push. It can't teach you when not to push it. It can't give you the pattern recognition that comes from seeing 1,000 small problems before they become big ones. The room was quiet. That distinction, I continued, cost my company $12.7 million in immediate losses, $3.1 million in federal fines, and $8.7 million in annual revenue. It almost destroyed a business that took 20 years to build. All because someone decided that enthusiasm and buzzwords were more valuable than experience and knowledge. The presentation became one of the most downloaded papers in the conference's history. I started getting consulting requests from companies worried they were making similar mistakes. Madison's career never recovered. She stayed in marketing for 18 months, but clients who'd heard about the system failure questioned her judgment on everything. She'd pitch a campaign and someone would say, "Isn't this like that AI optimization thing?" Eventually, she left Quantum Tech and took a junior position at a startup. That company folded within a year. Troy's fall was more dramatic. Austin's tech community isn't that big, and word travels. His LinkedIn profile became a case study discussed in forums and subreddits about tech disasters. He applied for dozens of positions, but every hiring manager asked about the quantum tech incident. Last I heard, he was doing help desk work at some small firm outside Dallas, making maybe a third of what Madison had paid him. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Madison had fired me to make room for someone who understood modern technology. Instead, she'd hired someone who understood buzzwords but not systems, theory but not reality, confidence but not competence. And it cost her everything. I worked as CTO at Quantum Tech for 5 years. In that time, we rebuilt the company's reputation from the ground up. We implemented robust change management processes, created proper training programs, and built a team that understood the difference between innovation and recklessness. The board meetings were different now. When I said something needed to be done a certain way for technical reasons, people listened. No one questioned whether we should disrupt the backup system or leverage AI to optimize critical infrastructure. They'd learned that lesson the expensive way. Howard stepped down as CEO 3 years after the crash. The stress had aged him, and he wanted to retire while he could still enjoy it. He sold the company to a larger firm for a good price, and my 2% equity stake turned into a check that let me pay off my mortgage and set up a trust fund for my daughter. I announced my retirement on my 57th birthday. The company threw me a party at a nice restaurant downtown. The whole executive team was there, along with most of the technical staff. Howard came, even though he'd been retired for 2 years. He gave a speech about my contributions, how my expertise had saved the company from bankruptcy, how the crisis taught them about the importance of experience and institutional knowledge. He talked about the danger of dismissing wisdom in favor of trends. Gordon taught us that progress isn't about replacing what works, Howard said. It's about building on what works and improving it thoughtfully, systematically, and with respect for those who came before us. After I retired, I started doing consulting work. Small and medium-sized tech companies would hire me to review their systems, their teams, their processes. I'd spend a few weeks with them, identify risks, make recommendations. The work was interesting, and I could do it on my own schedule. I also started mentoring young developers. Not the arrogant ones who thought they knew everything, but the ones who were smart enough to know they didn't. I'd meet them for coffee or lunch, answer their questions, tell them stories about the disasters I'd seen and how to avoid them. One kid, maybe 25, asked me once, "How do you know when you have enough experience to make big decisions?" I thought about that. When you've seen enough things go wrong that you can spot the warning signs early. When you understand that most disasters don't happen because of one big mistake, but because of 10 small ones that nobody noticed until it was too late. About a year into retirement, I wrote a book, The Experience Dividend: Why Institutional Knowledge Matters in the Age of Disruption. I didn't expect much from it, just wanted to get the ideas down on paper. But it caught on in tech circles, became required reading at a few business schools. My daughter told me one of her attending physicians at Mass General quoted it during rounds, talking about how experience matters in medicine too. That made me proud. Not the book sales or the speaking invitations, but knowing that the lesson might help people avoid the mistakes that nearly destroyed quantum tech. I'm 59 now. My daughter finished her residency and joined a practice in Boston. She married another doctor, a good guy who makes her laugh. They gave me a grandson last year. He's 18 months old, and I fly out to see him every couple of months. Sometimes I meet up with Clarence and Alex for golf. We play 18 holes, grab lunch, talk about the old days. Diane moved to Seattle to work for Amazon, but we email occasionally. All of them are doing well, running their departments, making good money, getting the respect they deserve. About 2 years ago, I got an email from Madison. She'd heard about my consulting work and wanted to apologize for how she'd treated me. She wrote a long message about how her arrogance had cost everyone dearly, how she'd learned valuable lessons about leadership and humility, how she hoped I could forgive her. I read it twice. Then I deleted it without responding. Some lessons are too expensive to forget. Some bridges are burned beyond repair. Madison made her choices, and she lived with the consequences. That's how it works. I still drive past the old quantum tech building sometimes when I'm in Austin visiting friends. They've got a plaque in the lobby now. Gordon Wallace, CTO 2020-2025. Builder of foundations, guardian of systems. Someone sent me a photo of it. I've never stopped to look at it in person. I know what I built and I know what it's worth. That's enough. Looking back, I realized this story isn't really about revenge. I didn't sabotage anything. I didn't leave traps in the code. I didn't withhold information or set anyone up to fail. I just documented everything properly, handed it over professionally, and walked away. What happened after that was just the inevitable consequence of replacing competence with confidence, experience with enthusiasm, wisdom with buzzwords. Madison and Troy destroyed themselves through their own arrogance and incompetence. I simply documented the process and stayed ready when they needed someone who actually knew what they were doing. The best revenge, I learned, isn't some elaborate scheme. It's being proven right by time and consequences. It's watching incompetence reveal itself while you maintain your integrity. It's getting the call at 6:47 a.m. and being able to say, "I told you so," without ever having to actually say it. My daughter calls me every Sunday. Last week, she told me about a situation at her hospital where administration wanted to cut nursing staff to save money. The senior nurses warned it would compromise patient care, but the administrators pushed ahead anyway. 3 months later, they had a near-miss incident that could have killed someone, and they had to hire the nurses back at higher salaries. "It's like your story, Dad," she said. "They learned the expensive way." "Most people do," I replied. "The smart ones learn from other people's expensive mistakes. The rest have to pay tuition themselves." I'm consulting less these days, spending more time with my grandson, playing more golf, enjoying the bourbon collection I've been building for years. I've got a nice Pappy Van Winkle 23 year that I'm saving for my 60th birthday next year. Life turned out pretty well for a dinosaur with boomer mentality. They wanted to purge the old guard and bring in fresh perspectives. They got what they wanted, and then they got what they deserved. I'm good with how it all turned out.